Hey, it's Andy, and it's the week of Thanksgiving in the States, and so we're going to take a break from releasing new episodes and give you a chance to catch up on past ones that you might have missed, or to check out two of my favorite past interviews, Part 1 with David Monn on Monday, and Part 2 with David on Wednesday. Both were recorded well before the pandemic, and so you're going to hear the original interviews. I want to also say that in spite of all the challenges that we're all facing at this time in history, I hope we can all feel gratitude for what we do have. And one of the wonderful things I have in my life is you, our listeners. I really appreciate all the time you give to listening to these interviews and all the comments through reviews and social media. And I also want to thank my guests who have given their time and let themselves be vulnerable to express themselves in this show, The Wedding Biz. So thank you all and have a wonderful holiday. David, it is such a pleasure to get together, and let alone I get to be in your beautiful home.
Well,
I love it.
Thank you.
What I've seen so far. Yeah.
You know, I'm happy you're here because I think this is a place that feels complete to the things that I do in my work. So I think it will.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling. So.
Yeah. What I'd like to start with, it's interesting, and I was looking at your website, your homepage, and there was a quote that immediately grabbed my attention, and I'm going to imagine that encapsulates your entire philosophy. You say, from the ascent of a single gardenia to the first sound of a guest takes in, each detail is chosen to create a tapestry of sensations. I love that. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, and that is pretty much the entire ethos of what I do. Over the years, I have tried to figure out how to articulate to others what it is that I do or how I do it, and through asking the divine powers above to give those words to me. That is what's come to me, and what I've come to learn is that our body actually works in a rhythm, and that we are our brain is probably the least important component in it, other than it's the mainframe that holds it all together. But that our senses are actually what do lead us, engage us, and then create the experience we're in. So, and our body works in a rhythm that is first, and probably the thing that we think of last, is the sense of smell. It is the thing that we are aware of even when we're not conscious. When we are sleeping, we smell smoke. Smoke gets us up, and there's a fire. So our sense of smell is the, and within the senses of the body and the brain, the sense of smell sits right on the top of the forehead. In fact, actually, there are some scientists that will say that they believe that the brain grew from the nose over evolution. And so it's first the sense of smell, then the sense of sound, and then the sense of sight. And those three things happen within a split second of each other. But if they are not linked together, they do not complete something. And so I often will say to people, imagine the most beautiful, beautiful thing you've ever seen, and now smell garbage. You cannot disconnect the two. And imagine sitting in or being in the midst of the most tranquil garden that you've ever imagined, and you're hearing a jackhammer or, acid rock. It's no longer tranquil. So all of those little things line up together. And then we continue down into touching something because we're now tactile, we're engaged, and then touching. If we complete the cycle of senses, we taste, and taste cannot happen without smell. So there is this constant evolving emotion through our senses. And that's what I do.
Whenever you're thinking of creating something, you're coming from that angle
every
all
single
the time.
minute. And it cannot happen without it. Whether it's a dinner for two, an engagement of 2,000, whether it's for a corporate event, whether it's for a wedding, or whatever, whatever that those same five things, they must be aligned all the time, because then we are engaged in our way. Our bodies are moving in something that even we're not even consciously aware of.
I want to come back to all this, but I'm curious about your childhood and anything that may have happened in it that influenced who you are today, how you grew up. I know you grew up in Fayetteville, not
Pennsylvania.
Fayetteville, not exactly the center of culture in the world.
Wow, that's a great question. I grew up in a very, very small town, a large family in a small town. And, I over the course of time, from a long time, I said simple code is simple for. I grew up very poor, but I was always intrigued. I was always wanting to make something better. Some of the influences to answer what your question was, because we had very little, everything that we had to protect. We had to take care of. My father was a very strict enforcer of everything had order. He was a military guy. Nothing was ever out of place. And so that protection and order, I think, has set something in place for me that I do know moving forward in this part of my life, was that when you've edited things down for not having something, once you have things, you can have, once you have, if you've had the opposite of it, you then don't see something. So then it takes the editor to get down for it to be seen. And I think over the course of time, I've used that simplicity to get to, if you can only have one thing, have that one thing be something. And order is one of the main rules that I engage in even in my office workplace. If things are not orderly, it won't flow, it won't function. And that goes to any engagement of party that we do, because if it doesn't have order, it's not going to work. And I think also growing up, I was a dreamer. I would go every Saturday into I would go with my grandmother into town, to the next big town, where she would get her hair done. And after she'd get her hair done, we would go to Palmer's Counter. It was the drugstore in the main part of town. And we would get a malt and a grilled cheese sandwich. And afterwards, Mrs. Palmer would allow me to look at Architectural Digest.
How old were you at this time?
From early on, I would say my earliest memories are probably around 8 or 9, up till I was a teenager.
Interesting. 8 or 9, you're looking at Architectural Digest.
Yes, because I don't know how, but afterwards, it caught my eye, and she would allow me. It's such a wonderful story. She would allow me to look at the magazine, but I was never allowed to bend the cover.
Oh. Okay.
And it is where I dreamed of what I would one day want to be, or where to be. And that was our Saturday afternoons. Many years afterwards, I left home in my life, and I had some success. I came home and I went to Mrs. Palmer's or to the drugs, to the store, and to say hello to Mrs. Palmer. She was very old at that point. And I said, "Do you remember when I used to?" She said, "Oh, I never sold Architectural Digest. I only ever had it for you."
Oh, David.
Yeah. Pretty incredible.
I'm moved. That's a beautiful story.
Yeah. And I had an art teacher. I mean, I was not a popular kid in school. I was the kid that I come from a family that were athletes, and football and basketball. Those were the sorts of thing, track or what have you. I weighed 180 pounds in the 5th grade and 235 pounds by the 8th grade.
I can't imagine this.
Yes. And I liked to pick wildflowers and take my grandmother's lace tablecloths and drape them around the neighbor girl and have mock weddings. Yeah. And that was not a good popular idea.
And also I'm thinking with your father, was he aware of that? That had to be
not
tough.
Good. Not good.
Yeah.
Not good. But an art teacher who knew that there was something within me, who encouraged me and really protected me through school and into high school. And it was actually quite incredible. And then I was in my sophomore to senior year of high school, she planned our art projects to be the things that were needed to put into a student submission portfolio to Parsons.
Wow.
Yeah.
God, Dave, just for a moment, I'm thinking for myself, the mentors I've had mentors as far back as I can remember. And the support, setting aside regardless of whether I didn't have support from my parents, and I did have a lot of support, but to have a mentor, someone outside of the family, right? You don't have that complicated dynamic, that psychological element of what it is with a parent. To have them support you and help guide you, it is, I don't know who I would be without these people.
Yeah.
It sounds like that's the role that
that's
this
what she
person had
was,
for
Mrs.
you.
Etter. Yeah, Louisa Etter. Yeah, and and in a rather hard situation because it was not a popular thing to protect. I was not the popular kid in class.
So you ended up going to Parsons, I imagine?
So here's the story. So I was accepted with a partial scholarship, and my father, who had never borrowed money ever in his life and didn't believe in it, and said, you can go get a job, and when you get the money, they will like you now, they'll like you then. And no, I was not able to go to Parsons. And it carried such shame for me for a very long time that lying about, when you come to New York and you are striving to make it in places, where did you go to school? What was your education? And being in social circumstances, to say I didn't go to college was something I carried with great shame. So I would avoid any of those conversations until I decided I'm going to go take some classes at Parsons.
And how old at this point?
I'm now 18.
Okay.
I'm here. I came to New York when I was 18. And I took fashion rendering courses so that I could say, when somebody said to me, where'd you go to school? I said, I studied at Parsons. And I wanted the conversation to change very quickly because I didn't want it to go to, what year did you graduate, or to the next step. So I would have to then say, well, I didn't, but I could say I just studied and move it on.
Well, interesting. So
I've never gone to college. So.
Well, listen, I'm sure that there's some serendipity to this synchronicity, right? I mean, I don't know. Who knows what would have happened had you gone to Parsons, but look at where you're at today. I don't know what more you could be doing.
Well, pretty blessed, actually.
So you're 18, you're going to Parsons. What is it that you do that starts to get you into the industry?
So I came to New York, as I said, I wanted to go to Parsons. I wanted to be a fashion designer. And from not being able to go to school for it, I thought the only way I could get in the fashion industry was to get a job within the industry. So in my hometown were factories that were sewing factories for, in fact, we had 3 really large plants in the area for a company called Jonathan Logan, which does not even exist anymore, but it was the largest garment manufacturer in America. And so I went there and I got a job working. I knew how to sew and from a very young age, and I got a job working as a time study on the sewing floor. And from that, one door opened to the next very, very quickly, and I was able to move to the New York office to be the assistant to a woman who her assistant had gotten pregnant and had complications with her pregnancy and had to take bed rest. And this job was open immediately because she had planned a trip to the Far East, an extended trip to start. This was in the early 80s, to lay groundwork for much of the production that was happening in this country to be moved offshore, which was eventually not a good thing for a lot of workers. But that was the opening, and that's how I got to New York.
Did you go on that trip?
I did.
Wow.
I did. Oh, it's a great story. This is a great, great story. So I arrive at the airport. I had never traveled anywhere. I am 19, and this trip was to be about 3 hours or 3 weeks long. And I was flying. I get my tickets from the travel part of the company, and I'm flying Pan Am.
Is this your first flight, by
class.
the way?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, well, and you have to. When I came to New York, the company put me up for a short little time in a hotel, till I could get acclimated or I find an apartment, and it was the Milford Plaza Hotel on 8th Avenue and 42nd Street, and where I'm from, we have motels. I mean, they're one floor. Even a hotel was something like a new experience.
Well, I'm also thinking, not to take you off track, but you're at 8th and 42nd in the early 80s. I remember New York City in those days, that street.
Well, here's what I learned. This is kind of funny. My sisters, in their summer jobs, they would clean the rooms of the local motel where we had, because it was right down the road from where we lived. And I can always remember that it was like you were the fear of getting fired if you didn't have the rooms finished and have the cart removed by noon, because the new people would be checking in at noon. And after I was in the Milford Plaza for about a week or so, I was so perplexed because the cleaning carts were never, ever removed from the hallway. They were constantly there. And I said to one of the people in the office one day, I don't understand, the service is so bad. These carts are there all the time. And they were like, David, probably because you could rent a room for the hour. And I was like, why would anybody ever want a room for an hour? I don't understand that. So that was my first, welcome to the big city.
Yeah.
But my traveling back to the story, because it was so wonderful. I arrive, I'm flying Pan Am first class. And what struck me odd was that I was seated in the bulkhead aisle, and the president, my boss, was seated also in the bulkhead aisle. We were not sitting side by side. I thought, okay, I don't know. But so I arrive at the airport, and I'll never forget it. She arrived right in front of me, actually. In those days, you dressed in a suit and tie.
That's right. I remember.
And
sure.
We arrive at the first class check-in area. And I get out, and I had to go borrow luggage. I never had luggage. I never traveled. So I went back home to Pennsylvania, and my aunt had lent me with some of her friends. I don't know if you remember this big, hard Samsonite.
Oh, sure. And there were no straps, no wheels. We had to carry it up.
And it was very pretty. And none of it matched. I had a Harvest Gold piece, one that was sort of this bad blue, and then one that was a burgundy kind of other. So these three big hard cases of luggage. And I pull up with my luggage, and she looks at me and she goes, "Where do you think you are going?"
That's great.
I was shocked. I was like, "Well, with you, I hope, I think." And she goes, "Not with that, you're not."
Oh, damn.
And I was crushed. I thought she meant because it didn't match, and it wasn't. I mean, she had her one piece of Louis Vuitton, because the Louis Vuitton in those days,
because it didn't match.
And I didn't. I said, "But I'm sorry, Carol. I had to borrow it. I'm sorry that it doesn't match." And she was like, "I don't give a beep about the color. If you can't carry it on, it isn't going on." I had no idea what she was talking about. I didn't understand that. I mean, I'm going away for 3 weeks. How do you carry on?
Listen, I don't know what I would do.
3 weeks. Yeah. And she, says, gets the porter. She says, "Gather this up." And we go in, and she says to the check-in girl, "Where is the lost and found?" And we go down the aisle. She gives the guy $20. She says, "I need to borrow a piece, something that we can travel with, soft fold out. What do you have? And we'll bring it back in a couple weeks."
This is
prior to 9/11. So none of this was guy said, "Well, there's some stuff down there. It's been sitting for a while. Go, help yourself." And I will never forget it, because I will never, ever, ever own a piece of this luggage ever. It was a fold out. I won't say the name because I don't want to say anything to the company, but it looked like it's a soft and it was sort of bad brown, and the material is like a carpeting of sorts. And this piece had someone's dank, laundry in it for God knows how long.
It smelled, you're telling me?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
and
no.
so she proceeds to then take this piece. We empty it out. And she taught me how to pack for 3 weeks in one bag.
Come on.
It was extraordinary.
Is it the rolling thing?
Well, no, it was also that I never considered that you could launder something when you're traveling, and that you would wear one thing that you could wear with 3 other things. And the simplicity of having one jacket, 2 pair of trousers, and 3 shirts. And I can tell you, to this very day, I have never, ever, with the exception of one time, checked a bag.
Yeah.
And that one time I checked my bag was lost.
Oh, God.
So, but that was my beginning. When I came to New York, that was 1981. And shortly thereafter, I knew that design was what I wanted to be doing. And I was not, design for fashion did not happen easily in my sort of spirit and my creativity. I was an amazing sort of merchandiser, but I was not the designer. And I knew my dream was to be the next Calvin Klein, and I knew that wasn't really going to be. And I left that, and just happenstance took me into interior design. And a funny story. I mean, I had always decorated my own little things in my own little way. And one of my friends had an apartment that was left to her and some things and what have you, and said, could you make my apartment beautiful? And it was one thing after the other. And from that, I developed a couple clients, and one started an interior design business from that. And then from that, I went through a connection of one of my clients that I jumped over from that world into the fine jewelry world. Strange leap from one part of creation to another. But I did that for the better part of 12 years.
Designing jewelry?
Merchandising.
Oh, merchandising. You said 12 years.
I did that for 12 years.
Okay. So you're now in your 30s.
I am, well into my 30s, yes. And this, doing this part of my life came on, and it didn't happen on that day, but the day that all things changed was August the 8th, 2003. And why I remember that was because it's my birthday, and I had decided that I was very unhappy with what I was doing in the world of that I was in at the time. And I used to say to people something. I mean, I ran a design team that had several hundred employees, and I would say to people, if you are unhappy and God has given you a semblance of intelligence, and if he has blessed you with a talent and you are unhappy, the reason of that lies within the mirror. You must search that out. Mm-hmm. And I realized I was that unhappy, and I had certainly been, I think, given some intelligence, and I have been incredibly blessed with a talent, and I was unhappy. And so I had to do something about that. And I made a big change in one day, and I had really no idea what I was going to do. And from that, my best friend at the time, her name is still my best friend, Gayford Steinberg, had her stepdaughter was getting married, and she said, David, would you help the kids with this wedding? And there's no one who does this better than you, blah, 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 blah. And I never worked so hard. I hadn't worked as hard in 12 years as I did in the week to do it doing this wedding. And you had
never done this before, right?
Well, for myself, for fun. Yes. I mean, as years had progressed, I entertained quite a bit. I did the things that I do for myself, the way I would do them for myself. I've had great, great, great teachers and, mentors along the way. Oscar de la Renta was probably one of the greatest mentors to me, and Bill Blass was, again, a man who really influenced my life.
Can I stop there for a minute? Mm-hmm. Do you mind? What did you learn? What are some of the greatest things you learned from Oscar and then from Bill Blass? I would love to know that.
Oh, my. Oh, that's sort of
that's an opportunity. Wow.
So the passion for beauty of things and of life, refinement, and I've often said that you cannot buy luxury. Mm-hmm. Luxury is not something you can purchase. It is the byproduct of a life lived. And that is, I think, what much of these incredible people had taught me was absolutely things had great value to them, mm-hmm. From fine arts to furnishings and objets and all the incredible fine things. But it actually doesn't necessarily mean anything if it isn't used in a way that it actually enriches your life.
I love that.
And that process was something that I learned, not to wear it as an heir, but for it to actually make something better. And without question, the exposure to learn what makes something finer than another. I've often said what I've learned from many of these, and certainly Oscar being one of them, and another great friend was Caroline Rome, who really, Caroline worked for Oscar, and that's how we met, and our friendship was that beauty is not subjective, only taste is.
Wait a minute. Beauty is not subjective. I don't know if I follow that.
Well, so
because we are the ones who are giving it.
Taste is the subjective part, not beauty. So it's a pretty deep thought. And I'll tell you when I've looked at things from whatever it may be, historically, thousands of years to something that's being created this very minute, when it's being created purely, it is coming from an inner source, and it is being, and that process is pure. The creation of that will speak. Even something that's created in great agony. We look at Jackson Pollock,
which so much is.
Yeah. When you look at Jackson Pollock's work, and we now know, the torment that his life was at the time was the expression that he brought forth was pure, and it's beautiful. And I think that's that process that creates that. It's not like we're going to create something to shock the world, or we're going to make a political statement. If it is just simply you're doing what you're meant to do in that process,
then that's
of
beauty.
It comes through. And I think if you look at all sort of things through history, right now in the world of art, the contemporary art world, it's just, the expressions of art are so vast today, but much of it, I don't know what it's telling. I think it's telling something people want to tell versus it's just telling what is. I don't know. That's my short way to say how I think beauty arrives in the things we create. If it's just been done purely and through telling your own truth, it most likely probably will manifest in something beautiful.
Yeah, no, this is really fascinating to me, and it helps explain what I see and feel. I haven't been to an event of yours, but when I look at the pictures, the images, and read about it, I understand better. I want to go, I'm going to start going into some detail there about that aspect. You have another quote on your website. If I'm saying it right, Louis Kahn, about lighting. You said, "We are born of light. The seasons are felt through light. We only know the world as it is evoked by light."
Absolutely.
And he's an architect.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how you feel about lighting beyond that.
Well, your listeners are not going to be able to feel what you're feeling as you're sitting right now in this space.
Yes, even in your environment here,
but
sure.
The light in this space is everything of why it feels the way it feels. And I know that we are born of light. That's something that's very spiritual to me, as it was for Louis Kahn. But it's that light is part of the evolution of the world, and it's what the sun lights up our day with, if you want to look at it just even as simply as that. And it is the thing that fuels us. Today we have something that's challenging that tremendously, and there's something very different between light and illumination. And in my work primarily, everything that I have ever done, and I try very hard with anything that we are doing and to continue to do as it's becoming even more challenging, is that I use almost no LED lighting in anything that we do. We use incandescent light, an incandescent or the flame. And that's because we speak to the flame. I think when we look at, we are made up of energy. We are atoms. We are combustible. We are atoms that are in a flesh form, not a combustible form. So if we can understand in simply the science that we are made up of the same energy that candle flame is made up, but the candle flame is at the most potent form of any energy because it's expanding in its last final moments, and that power that happens with that, it actually overtakes us. It's why we can sit the human can sit in front of one single little candle and be put into a trance.
Oh, yeah. A fireplace outside of,
And we're drawn to it.
Totally.
It's why we're drawn to the kitchen. The kitchen is the hearth. Because the flame of the kitchen and then it's even combined even greater because it's combined with the thing that we are, the sustenance that keeps us alive. And that is food. And food is the other element that brings humanity together. And so when we put these things together, when we start to break them apart, we understand what makes people tick. And I know that when I put people together, what will make them feel is how I have lit it.
Yeah.
And how it is getting you. And that light is, unfortunately, incandescent light is the only thing that can do that. LED light cannot. So incandescent light is a filament. Tungsten it's actually not burning, but it appears to be burning. But it is a filament that actually expands energy like a candle flame does. It transmits itself on a infrared ray. So that is probably the single most important thing to know about the light that's different from LED, and that only incandescent light, like our sun, travels on infrared. So therefore, we know we photosynthesize within it. So it makes us feel. LED is digital.
Yeah.
It is phosphorus. It's put on the end of an electrode. It's charged and it glows. It's the simplest, scientific description of it. It has had much advancement to how the color is changed with shells and all sorts of other mechanisms to make your eye think that it's seeing the color of incandescent, but your body will never feel it, and therefore your brain is never going to register it as that. So that blue light that you see coming from the worst LED is exactly the same kind of light that you're seeing from the ones that have been said, oh, they've got as close to candlelight as possible. So, or tungsten as close. So light is probably within the finished component of the work that we do, the single most important thing, because I know that that's how I'm going to get you.
So outside of the use or not of technology or lack thereof, you are obviously then very involved in the design of lighting for all of your events.
I do the lighting design.
You're doing that yourself.
And when when the projects get very large, there's probably only one or two other exterior lighting designers. There's a gentleman who I adore and think is one of the greatest lighting designers in the industry. His name is Al Crawford. He's primarily a theater designer. I met him many years ago. I was at a dance performance. He lights pretty much most of all of the Ab and Ailey companies' dance performances. And I was so moved by the lighting of this one particular piece, and I saw his name, and I sought him out. This was a long, long time ago. And I said, one day I want us to create something together. And over the course of the years, we do many, many, many things together. And I will say with Al, what's interesting is that early on, as technology was moving more and more to the LED form of lighting, I became a voice that was very strong to say, we can't do this because we don't feel it. And how we feel is who we are. We only really think about that when we're not well. But on the day you have a cold, that's who you are. Yeah. So think about all those other things that affect us on a day-to-day basis. And when we're doing an event, we have a very narrow amount of time that I must engage you. It's not, I just must get you in, feed you, get you out. I must engage your everything to make that statement for which that event is there to be told for. And I know that one of the most important ones is light. And with Al early on, I really pleaded my case with him on LED versus incandescent. And
yeah, how did he feel about this?
It's very interesting because he actually is a professor, or teaches in a college on lighting design. And in those early days, it was, but David, this is where it's going, and it's environmentally this and that and the other. And all of that was partially true, but the truth of any of it is that we've never stopped to look at what is light for? What does it do? It's not just a utility. It was one of those creations that altered all the course of history. And just like the internet did, it has changed the course of history. Light, when Edison, and it was really not Edison who actually developed the light bulb. It was about,
I just read that recently.
It was about a century earlier by the gentleman by the name of Davy, who was a British scientist. And what he was really doing was trying to create the bulb, but he wasn't successful. And the thing that he was using to fuel the bulb was his then claim to fame. Davy invented the battery, and this set, this technology set for quite a while. But when the Edison bulb, or when light came into it, you know, we think about it as it's just something that exists all the time. But if you can think about it, the world was now lit at nighttime. And so when we were going to sleep, as we would do, because sun went down, and, you know, the most you could do was light a lamp. Beyond that, that was where life had stopped. And then we lit the dark, and the world changed forever. And so we considered it simply a utility. Enter in something new in it, and we've not thought about does it do anything more than just be another utility? And we've moved this dial now, which is something quite tragically, because it's been moved in the sake of the environment, and we have not used one drop less of fossil fuel to light the world we're in today. But yet we've changed all of the rules and made the guidelines to be that LED is the world in which we're moving. And I believe that no one has really, really stopped to see, how do we feel in these environments? And there's not anyone that I can ever talk to that doesn't say, imagine what you feel like in a fluorescent lit room, because that's the exact same feeling. The fluorescents just were never meant to disguise it. It was a utility bulb meant for utility work. It was called a utility bulb.
I can't stand fluorescent light.
In fluorescent lighting, that same feeling you have is what you're going to feel in LED lighting over time, because the balance of it has just now really tipped. We're only in the last year or so seen the balance of where there was incandescent and LED that coexisted, and now it's entirely turning.
So what about outside? When you're doing an outside event, you're obviously incorporating whatever the light is, and if it's as it turns to dusk, that transition and then into night. Yeah. How do you work with that outside?
I love that, because then what that time frame does is, and what's really important in the work we do, because I always say to people, we must engage as far as you can see to as near as you can touch.
That's an interesting point.
Because it may be in your out of focus, but it's in your conscious.
Yes.
So you will, as you are sitting here, what's happening at that building across the street is actually in our experience.
We're not aware of it, but it's affecting us subconsciously.
Absolutely. It's part of this. It's part of this. Yeah. So what I love when we're doing something that's outdoors, and when it comes to lighting, as we, as the evening turns from daylight or dusk into nighttime, it is, how do I then create and make the distant become the mystery and the magic? And so lighting things in the distant that then create me to feel that there is something going on, so that it isn't just this, or it's not in this little, even if we're in a tent, how do I then create a view outside the tent that I'm actually focused on down? So I'm lighting up a grove of trees, or I'm lighting up water, so that I'm layering, layering beyond just this. What's it in front of us?
now I'm going to look at lighting completely differently. And I thank you for that. I thank you for that.
I hope if you have LED bulbs, you're changing them back to incandescent, which is hard.
In another direction, and starting again with a quote by Thomas Jefferson, so I know you know what I'm going to say. No occupation is so delightful to me as the culture of the earth, and no culture comparable to that of the garden.
Well, and I was just this weekend in the garden and putting my hands in the soil, and I think what's so extraordinary is whether it's as simple as some, religions are ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We are part of the earth, and the earth is part of what we are and what we do. And springtime for me is that it's a combination of color, it's a combination of smell, and it's a combination of seeing the possibilities of things. And being in a garden is, I think, one of the most rewarding things. Even here in New York, it's hard, but walking down a street and seeing where someone has taken a tree well and cared for it, to know that it feeds us. We're not all hard surfaces.
So how do you incorporate that philosophy into your events?
Well, I try always. The seasons are very important in our events. And I think there has to be something authentic to that. There are 3 rules that I use in what we do, and it's authenticity, scale, and detail. And those are the 3 architectural fundamental principles of what we work on. And the authenticity part of it is so important that even the season is something that we start with. If someone is getting, and often I have brides that come in and they're getting married in February, and they've always dreamed of peonies, and peonies are the thing they love. And I happen to think peonies are one of the most extraordinary creations. But in New York City, peonies aren't growing in February. And there is something that will never feel in sync with going to something in the middle of February where you have put on a fur coat, a fur coat you're not doing, or a winter coat, and you get inside a wedding and you're sitting to this, beautiful bouquet of peonies. And although it may be beautiful, it is not in sync naturally.
So you're going to talk to the bride and say, yeah, we could fly in or whatever. You wouldn't do it.
No, I won't do it.
Yeah.
No, I actually won't do it. I tell brides, if that's who you want, then I can give you the name of somebody who'll do that for you. Because in the end, it must all feel true. Not true to you because you are already there. True to a bigger picture. And that bigger picture, I assure you, I have assured brides that trust me in this, as when it feels magical and in every part being in sync, there is something that will happen that you can't explain. And that is why. It is that unexplained that comes.
I'm in music, and when Quincy Jones was producing Michael Jackson, it's known, at least amongst musicians like Billie Jean, for example, there are sounds that we cannot directly hear. You can't zone in, yet he put them in there because, again, it's something you feel.
Yeah.
You feel.
Yeah. And in an event, the seasons are something that we feel, and then go back to if we're inside, and fragrances to. It's a great story. When I did the first time I did the Costume Institute at the Met, it was for Chanel. And I'm in one of the early meetings, and I said to them, well, can we talk about how we'll get the fragrance, into the room? And I have these atomizing machines that we use. And they were like, oh, no. That's not possible. We wouldn't, it's not permitted. And I was really perplexed. And I knew that something would be missing in the experience that people were going to experience, because we must always be in balance. I mean, think about a body. When someone is blind, they have to create another sense or heighten another sense of touch to be able to then navigate. So when we're in balance, we just work naturally, right? And so that really, really troubled me. And I thought, well, I have got to find the solution. And actually, I say God delivered the solution to me. It wasn't, my entire, genius. But Coco Chanel's favorite flower, one of her favorite flowers, she had two, one was a camellia and the other was the gardenia. And so then I thought, that's it. I'm going to create this massive arrangement and we're going to bring in, we'll fill it with thousands of gardenias. And the gardenia will be the flower that we use everywhere. And it was amazing because that year, the single overriding comment that everybody commented on was how incredible it smelled. And so they walk up the stairs. It's at twilight and we were going into a garden theme. We saw this massive, giant bouquet arrangement filled with, I forget over the time, but like truly thousands of gardenias. You smelt the gardenias. I had put in a soundtrack of crickets and tree frogs while you walked through an alley of pear blossoms and you were ushered into the garden. So you were in that experience. It was all right there, So the fragrance is, when it's all sort of, natural. And so coming back to a garden and why I think also every single thing we do, unless it's in the dead of winter, a living element is vital because the living element, we're part of the living element.
I would also like to ask you about the different kind of events that you do and your approach to each one, starting with weddings. And again, I read somewhere, now I'm getting it with everything that you've talked about thus far, that every scent, sound, sight, touch, and taste is crafted to create the experience of a lifetime. And I love how you say that there must be magic in the telling. No one will ever forget your story. And this is related to weddings.
So for me, it is really simple because the rules in this process, and I mentioned this earlier, the authenticity and then scale and detail, regardless if it's a wedding or if it's a birthday party or it's the launch of a product, that is the three things that have to always be there. And I work in this process. I have often had brides come to me and they bring me their Pinterest things. And I tell them, I don't want to see any of that. I want to see you. And I will get to know you through what we talk about. And that then is what we craft. And so the authenticity starts with, it's a great funny story. We had a woman come to us quite a few years ago, and it was for her daughter's bat mitzvah. And she said the bat mitzvah was a year and a half out, and she wanted to make sure I was available and wanted to get me, signed on to do that. And I also have a rule in the company that I don't take anything out over a year.
Why is that?
Well,
because you're already working on it, right? And it's too much going on?
No, because I actually think it's plain and simple, actually. I used to say, if you want the product, I'm your person. If you want the process, lose my number. I'm not your date. Anybody that has more time than a year to plan an event has too much time on their hands.
So it's giving you a hint at what could be coming with process.
Yes, because the process of how I create is my process. I can bring you along through the journey of it, but I'm having done interior design for many years.
Okay.
The process is more times what someone wants than the product. So anyhow, this woman, we said, we're sorry, but we don't take, and she was quite persistent. And she finally, after being sort of beaten down, we said, fine, let's have her come in. And so the whole team is sitting around, and she starts to tell us about the fact that she had reserved an airplane hangar near to where they live, because she knows that I like a big open box to create in. And so I could see everybody around the room getting excited because they're like, oh, this woman understands scale. And she's like, that's kind of okay. And everyone, it was really very funny because everyone was like, oh, okay, this is getting good. And then she said, and we've already picked the theme we want. And you could see everyone go, oh.
And they're just waiting to see.
They're like, oh no. Well, because they know that I don't do themes.
Yeah.
You are the theme.
Yeah. I love that.
And I was now being polite. I was, raised to be polite. And I think, okay, what do I do? And I could see Liz, my office manager, thinking, oh, how do I get this to finish? Because he's going to kill me. And I said to her, well, please tell me a little bit about what theme you've chosen. And she said, oh, well, we've chosen a safari theme. So I'm very quickly, I am a solution-oriented guy. Don't ever bring me the problem, bring me the solutions, bring me the options.
I like that.
And so I'm thinking, okay, safari. Okay, we'll build a 40-foot banyan tree. I can see old woodies and canvas tents and thousands of lanterns and silver out of Africa. Okay, got it. Visually, I'm in for this now. And I said, well, now explain to me a little bit, because I wanted to hear the story of the safari. I was really hoping to hear that this young, girl wanted to grow up to be a vet because she loves animals so much, or that the family had gone on a safari and it was life-changing, or they do this as an annual thing, or possibly that they, trace their Jewish roots to Africa, which I also know of a family that we'd done something similar for. And she said, "Oh no, we just think it would be cool, and we're going to send out little suitcases and put safari hats and jackets in them, and everybody will come wear them, and the girl could arrive into the party on an elephant."
So technically, it's really not about them at all.
It is about them, but it is about them in truth, not in make-believe, and that is the most important component to, I think, everything that we do, is that I never want I want everyone to walk into the events we do and have their breath taken away and say, oh my God. I never want them to immediately say, this is David Monn's party. I want them to say, it's your party. But what I want them, after they have been in it, and they have looked and touched and been immersed in it, to say, oh, there is no one this has to be David Monn, because no one else could have done this complexity and have it be this important or this meaningful. And I mean meaningful not in a grand way, but in that the simplest things take the most effort, actually. And so when clients come in, the process is really always the same. And it is, I need to know you and what it is that you resonate with and or vibrate with. And then I layer that into creating the fantasy of something that you most likely have never really envisioned, because that's not, we all have different talents. Yeah. And that's my talent, and others, have their talents, but coming back to the authenticity part, and then we marry it with the next two things that are really, really important, and that is scale. Scale is drama. Scale is theater. We are actors on the stage. Shakespeare wrote true stories. They weren't fantasies. They were life, but they were acted out with the intent of drama, intrigue, and timing, and precision, and that happens along the way. So the scale is, whether it's in a location, I never like any, I know if I've gone into, we go into a place that's been used before, I never want it to look the same. We don't do two things ever again, because first off, they're yours. Yeah. It's not... Right. It's not cookie cutter to me. It's personal. It's very personal. And also maybe in a detrimental sense for me, it's the art that we create, not the business. Business is very important to me, because I want we deal with clients that entrust great sums to us, and I run a very tight business, professional. That's what the last part of my life taught me to be. But what we really create is an art form. And so it can't be duplicated because that art form was created once for something else. And then so the three components of authenticity, scale, and then detail is that it's those layers and layers and layers that are under every single thing that we do that makes it have this very deep richness. It's like a painting. What you see on the surface of a painting, what makes the painting illuminate is the layers that are underneath it, not what's on the surface. The surface is the end, but it's all of that that's underneath it that you are drawn into.
It's a great analogy. I love that. How, talking about, I understand that for you, the process will, I'm sure, be similar across all kinds of events, but in terms of corporate events, gala fundraisers, now for corporate events, you had said business is more complex than a single thought. You said an organization has an identity, a story, a purpose. Your event should invoke that.
Absolutely. I always say you can't create a brand. A brand is the extension of the product and its purpose. And in its use, therefore, is a brand. And so someone comes to us with a new idea. It's very, very hard. It's very important, but you have to have that DNA of what you're talking about, or what it is that your product or your process that you're trying to convey. And that event has to speak to that, and probably more so in the detail and the authenticity, and that be there, because you won't convince somebody of it. That cannot sit on the surface. That's probably more complex of a project when we take on corporate projects, because that, and in turn, you have to convey to people something that they're not necessarily already preconditioned to receive. If someone's coming to a wedding or a birthday party, they're already ready for that, But if you're bringing somebody to something that is a corporate event, their ideas have to be convinced first. Even if they've just said, "Oh, I like this, I'll go," but then there's something you have to grab them with.
Yeah, interesting. If you could tell me a couple stories, I would love that. You did the 100th anniversary of the Plaza Hotel. I mean, that's major. Can you tell me something about that, something about your process?
So what was funny about that was the hotel in New York, and I discovered in sort of researching just the Plaza, the Plaza is the only place that you can actually mail a piece of mail to that just says the Plaza, and it will arrive.
That's great.
There is none other there's none other.
It's so iconic.
Yeah, from around the world. We did this
even around the world.
From around the world. You post something, the Plaza.
You're saying you don't even have to put New York, New York?
No. Because
that's great.
It's sort of a given and known. And the hotel was when it was quote unquote going into renovation, it was quite controversial because it was going to have condominiums and all sorts of other things changed to it. And the Plaza was one of those also unique things in New York that people have their own sense of ownership to it, whether it was their wedding, their sweet 16, they went there with their grandmother for tea. They had a personal, really, really, visceral personal connection to this property. And when it closed, it was promised to reopen on its 100th birthday. And it wasn't ready. So this 100 celebration was something that the owner and the developers really were trying to buy some time to have people not be disappointed with it. And so it was to be just a little party and something. And when I met them, and after we started to talk about this, I said, this is something that New Yorkers feel ownership to, and the centennial of it is something that give back to the city something on this. And so this whole idea grew from, let's create a birthday party for the building and make it the party. And so I had this crazy idea of let's cover the entire building with fireworks.
The entire building.
The entire building, and have fireworks shooting off the building. And so I went to Garucci, and who we'd known and we'd done some other work with. And I said, I want to do this crazy idea. Do you think it's anything we can do? And another good friend of mine who was in the city said, I think that if you can get the fire department to be on board with this, then maybe other people would get on board with it as well. So my entire family are professional firefighters. Okay. All of them but me. And so I reached out to the battalion chief and met with the fire department and said, I have this really crazy idea. If it were to be done, how could it be done safely, and would there be a way? And it was, what was incredible, what I learned about that actually was, my brothers, they'll stop to my warehouse to check out my warehouses to make sure that I'm compliant in my fire codes in my warehouses. Okay. So I by the book is how we do things. And I learned a long time ago, that when you bring people on board and you involve them versus, which can happen quite differently in New York, because we have a lot of people that just think they can do, I can afford it, I'll do it. I don't work quite that way. I work, let's see, how do we get something done with everybody on board? And so the fire department said, yeah, I think we could do this. We would need to protect this, and, but yeah. And so then the fire department said, okay, we'll be on board, but we'll be on board if the police are on board. And the police said, okay, well, if the fire department feels it's safe, we can do this. And it was just this incredible thing that happened. And then we built it to, let's make this be a moment in a night for New Yorkers. And what was so incredible that happened that will probably never happen again is that we closed 59th Street and Fifth Avenue for 1 hour in the middle of rush hour.
Oh, in the middle of rush
to set off fireworks to celebrate a landmark in New York for New Yorkers. And it was so incredible. Created the largest, Ron Ben Israel, who's one of the great.
He was on the show too.
Maker. I love Ron. Created I think probably till this day, probably one of the largest cakes ever.
He talked about that.
Yeah. But what was so incredible about that was, things that are meant to be, if you do them with the right heart and spirit, they will eventually, if they're meant to be, will be. And I always say, I'm not the creator, just the conduit to these things. And this was one thing that connected to the other, and it was quite serendipitous of how it ended up being. So I had a lot of fun.
Well, I'd like to go into talking about the business of art. We'll call it that, of events. It is obviously, in order to have the level of success that you've had, being able to also approach the business side of this with the same focus, the same purpose, same intent, all of that intensity is critical. How do you view that part of it? From building your business, managing, choosing people, it's really complicated. The finance of it all. Yeah. How do you handle business?
It is the artistic side of the business is probably 20% of it, and 80% of it is the rest of running the business. But in my past, when I was in the interior design business, and why I left it was, I was convinced that the decorator never gets invited to the table of a client as an equal. And that really, really sort of stuck with me. And once I had left, and I was quite, the jewelry business was a successful part of my life. It was not fulfilling in the artistic side of it. And I realized that, and I had been part of building and running a very, very, very large company. And when I went into this, I committed to know that I wanted to do something that was very, very different, and very different than what was and how the design industry was looked, or the interior design industry was looked. And in the interior design industry, most clients or most clients will say, they start off wanting to, they want to spend $100 and it's going to take 2 weeks and it ends up costing $500 and takes 2 months, not exactly those numbers, but you know what I'm just saying it in a way. And I cared very, very much that this part of the business, that I would be respected more for the professional business part of my business than I would be for the art form.
Interesting.
Because people that are going to entrust millions of dollars to you care that you are as solid of a businessman as they are at one to create it, to be able to spend it. And that was really important to me. And that's probably the hardest thing there is to do in the business. Much in part because this industry is, first off, it's a very tough business. And if you are not taking a product and you're selling it multiple times, the cost of creation is new every time. So it's very hard. And that part of the business is challenging because it's constantly, and the business also, by the way, is a business that it's an ebb and flow business. It's, there's not a standard to it. And even if you're busy, you may be busy with something that's an event for 100 people, and then you have an event that's for 500 people. So even the scale of how you execute a busy calendar is very different. But in this industry, what's very, very hard about it is, I have now been doing this for 15 years. It's a very short amount of time. I can't even imagine how the time has flown. But when I started in this, there were really only a few people that were really known in it. And two in particular that I had really only ever focused on because I never really, I always keep blinders on to do what I do and what other people are doing or what they do. But the two at the time, and this was in 2004, and with great, great, great respect for them. One was Robert Isabel. Because Robert was the reason there is an event industry is because of Robert. Robert worked with Rennie and Rennie Reynolds, but Robert was the person who had this extraordinary creative ability and took this to the next big wow level. And I think, like Julia Childs was to cooking, Martha Stewart was to living, Robert was to the event industry. There were these people that, carved out a path, and then the wake was there. And the other was Colin Cowie, because Colin had taken what he was doing, and long before Colin was Colin was known for his television show before his events were simultaneous, but you knew him as a personality. And I had great respect for that because that was a visual brand that had moved out from just simply parties. But over the course of the last 10 years, this industry has exploded to where there is an amazing, amazing industry. But the frailty or some of the failure, or I don't want to say failures, because not failures is the word, but there is no standard rule of business. Everybody runs their business independently. It's every little mom and pop becomes their own thing. And so, there's not a standard structure for how people conduct their business, how people mark up their business from a cost to product sensibility. And I have tried very hard to set in place for our company, the structures that actually lay the groundwork for a business that can last out the person who founded the business. A solid business lives on after the founder is dead. And it's very hard in this industry because the creativity is the thing that drives the businesses mostly. But I cared that if the business had a solid business sense to it, that the creativity could be brought in and nurtured and flourished and created for something for the future.
So how did you go about educating yourself? This is a huge task to take on.
Well, I just
simply doing it. It's trial and fail.
I was part of running a $250 million company before, so I understood solid business practice, and I'm been very blessed. I don't want to slight this because I don't want listeners to seal this and think it's so simple. I have had incredible opportunities. I think life gives us three things that we have, and they're blessings, they're opportunity, and it's free will. And those first two are not given in equal measure to all of us. It's the mystery I don't have the answer to, and it frustrates me in many times. But I have been incredibly blessed. I've had incredible opportunity. But the thing I do know that we all have is free will. You got to work your butt off. And it's a lot of hard work. And, I set out to, I'm a type A OCD, overachieving Leo. I have a therapist that helps me work on taming some of that at times. But I set out to, if I was going to do this, I wanted to be better at it than it had been done. And not that I was gauging anybody else's not doing it well. I just knew that I had to be better at it than I could even have imagined it being. So,
if I may ask, as we get ready to wrap up, a few more questions. Are you comfortable talking about your pricing philosophy? Not numbers or anything like that, but are you charging a percentage? Can I ask how you view pricing structure?
Yeah, well, and that's where the business becomes very, very hard. I mean, we are, there's not a fee. Many people
not a design fee.
No, there's a fee to create, but that fee to create is then applied to the process in the end. Because for us and for me, that very hard moment for everyone, and I think this happens in everyone's business, is being able to get to what is the budget that the client wants to spend. And because every client is different and every firm is different, that challenge is very, very, very hard. And there's not a shelf price for what we do because it's bespoke, and it's bespoke at every step of the way. So that process of coming into, a client wants to spend somewhere between A and B. And this is where it's very, very hard for me in our business, which I think we're very unique in this sense, is that we do handle every aspect from the first piece of paper to every piece of clothing to everything you smell, sound, taste, touch, all the way out the door. And we do that, every part of that, as well as we are the director and we're the stage manager. If you can imagine it as a theater production in the end. And for us, the creation of that, there's money that has to be expended to put that in place, to even get to it. So there's a fee that puts that in place, but then it's applied to what the costs are in the end. And we have a very simple structure. There's commissions on things that we don't do internally, and then the things that we do are sold as though they would be sold to any other sort of retail situation. But that's the hard part of the business, is because there's no standard of business practice in this event world. And I think over time, some of us that have similar sorts of businesses and clients, there's becoming similarities in them only because clients may have worked with someone once and they work with somebody else once. And then, so we kind of know a little bit about what each other's business or how their businesses are run. But I say all the time, it is a business that you must love the product in the end of creating it, because it's not one that you are going to fly off to our third home on an island. It's not that. It's a tough business, but it's one you have to love.
So last question, if you were giving a master class to, let's say, an already somewhat experienced event planner, designer, what would you focus on? What are some of the most, if you had to pick one or two of the most important tips, advice to be aware of, to work on?
Well, because it's my own philosophy for me, I would stress that things, and we see it today, we see trends, we see fads. I always, say fashion was important in my life at one point because it's taught me how to be pertinent. Architecture and design was important because it's taught me purpose and scale. And business was important because it taught me how to be business. But all those three things together can only exist if I'm actually listening. And I think that I care about tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
As I shared with you when we were talking earlier, I care about history. I think history tells us the future, and purpose means things. And, there's another person in the business, you probably have even interviewed this person, who would say, you can make it up. There are new rules. And I don't agree with that at all. I believe there are rules. We have evolved. We continue to evolve. We should not reinvent ourselves. We must evolve ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that comes with purpose. So the purpose is for me to know you, and through that, then I and you entrust to me what my inner care and my purpose is to put back. And so to someone in the business, I always say, if you're looking at it from afar and it's the grand and glamour, you're probably going to fail, because the grand and glamour is not there. Mm-hmm. It's in that's a moment. Mm-hmm. But what really is are you connecting, and are you listening, and are you then putting that together for something else? That's kind of the simple stuff for me.
Whew. This has been incredible, David. Really, thank you so much. I'm going to put in the show notes for everybody how to find you, social media handle, all of that. There'll be some wonderful images and all of that. But this has been just a pleasure. Thank you. I learned a ton. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'm so happy we were able to finally get our time together. And as you can tell, I have no problem talking. It takes
and thank God for me in this. Thank you. I'm glad you don't have a problem. Well, thanks for talking.
Anytime.